Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Propaganda Podcast by the Moral Economy. This is our second episode in our third season. You might have noticed that we changed our name to Propaganda. We did this for a few reasons. Firstly, because we see ourselves as working through propaganda. We see that most of the news that we get in the mainstream is, to use the words of Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman, filtered through different ways to achieve certain ends. Secondly, we see ourselves as trying to rehabilitate the word of propaganda. Before, propaganda was not a negative word; it just meant, information or news. And so we see ourselves as trying to retake this word from the masters that have readjusted it. And thirdly, we changed it because we think it's a sexy word.
Yeah, we just want to provoke people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you probably stop, or hopefully you're listening to us. Or maybe one reason you're listening to us is because you saw the name and you thought, what the hell, these people are actually openly spewing propaganda.
And we are.
And we are, yes.
And we are.
But in the good sense.
Yeah, in the good sense,
Yeah.
exactly.
So,
our podcast is broken down in three different ways. The first one is GPS, Global Political Situation, where we're going to run you down through what's going on in the past week. The second one is the CIA, our current issue analysis. Today specifically, Navaz will be talking about the Nobel Prize. And lastly, we'll have our morale, something to kind of, I guess, how would you say this, Andrew?
uplifting.
Lift our spirits, yeah.
Lift our spirits.
Yeah. And with that, we're going to start with first our global political situation. Cho's going to start us off with that.
Am I starting?
No, actually, Eddie, you start.
You're starting, but maybe but you're your host, Eddie.
I'm not the host. We're all hosts.
Yeah,
We're all
yeah.
hosts.
This is Eddie. He's a host.
By the way,
Yeah, I'm Chell. I'm also a host.
I'm Andrew. I'm also a host.
I'm Nawaz, and I'm just a back scrubber.
Backscover.
We're all back scrubbers here.
So,
GPS.
Alright.
I guess I'll start with the GPS. The first thing we have is about Mosul. What was it? 4 days ago, international coalition, mostly led by the Iraqi military, started their siege over Mosul. Mosul has been controlled by Daesh or ISIS for the last 2 years. Sources say that Daesh has about 4,000 troops in Mosul, and their initial strategy was to ask their troops to retreat. And as the coalition forces attempted to invade Mosul, they met them with suicide truck bombers. Now, according to the coalition forces, we call them mostly Iraq, and the Kurdish Peshmerga, the Iraqi Kurds, it's going to take them about 2 months to reclaim Mosul. Of course, the interesting question that a lot of people are already starting to pose is, what's going to happen after the invasion? I mean, after the reacquisition of Mosul. What's it going to look like politically? That's something that we're going to keep you up to date about. Secondly, of course, there's been a humanitarian pause, as Russia claims, over Aleppo. This took place this past weekend. In fact, last night, Putin flew into Berlin to meet with Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, and of course the Prime Minister of France, Hollande, to discuss primarily Ukraine, but also Syria came into the discussion, where the humanitarian pause was extended from 6 hours to 12 hours, was it? And we'll also keep you posted with that. That's it for me. Cho, do you want to take it on from here?
Yeah. So I read an interesting article by investigative journalist Vanessa Beeley, and she has been living in Syria for the last few months and speaking with the Syrian people. And she wrote an article entitled "The Real Syrian Civil Defense Exposes NATO's White Helmets as Terrorist-Linked Imposters." She claims that the real Syrian Civil Defense, which is, by the way, an international civil defense organization certified fire and rescue organization, that it actually has no ties to the White Helmets, contrary to the White Helmets website. The White Helmets are in fact not recognized by the ICDO, the International Civil Defense Organization. And the White Helmets have ties to Blackwater, and they've received nearly $100 million in funding from Western backers. And she also claims that the White Helmets have been deployed by the West to derail the Syrian state, first by undermining existing civic structures and by disseminating staged PR to facilitate regime change propaganda through Western Gulf state media outlets. So I think that's a really interesting story, and I encourage everybody to go and do a little bit of research about the White Helmets in Syria. So I think you're up next again, Eddie.
Yeah, there's been recent claims over the Turkish bombing over the Kurds in Afrin and also in northern Aleppo, where they are controlled by the People's Protection Unit, that is the Syrian Kurdish Defense Forces, and generally the attacks on the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. There's been mixed reporting about this. It's normal, part of the propaganda, in the negative sense, propaganda campaign by the Turkish military, where they claim that they've killed anywhere from 150 to 200 YPG soldiers. YPG claims it's just been about a dozen of them, with also many civilians being attacked. This is an interesting situation, an interesting development that's going on, because some commentators are saying that the agreement that Turkey and Russia have is that Russia will take out the Turkish-backed Daesh. In turn, they'll allow Turkey to take out the American-supported YPGs. So we'll see where that goes. I thought you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd like to just step in. So, I mean, the sources for these numbers of up to 200 Kurdish fighters being killed by Turkish military, they are from the Turkish military themselves, which is a party to the conflict, so they cannot be trusted in any way. But furthermore, if you look at the news and you go deeper into the sources, according to one Facebook commentator, Karam Schamberger, all these sources come from a Turkish news agency called the Anadolu Agency, AA, which, according to Schamberger, is, quote, a pure propaganda machine of the AKP dictatorship.
Propaganda in the negative sense.
But Anadolu is their official news agency of Turkey, right?
Yeah, it's their official
one.
Yeah. Back to Eddie.
I mean, I think we should all maybe talk about this. In fact, last night was the presidential election, the presidential debates, third and last one, Trump versus Clinton, which is more like a Jerry Springer show than it is a real presidential debate. Just now the level, how fake American politics is becoming so evident nowadays. It's if anything, it's a good thing, I think. But the point of absurdity last night was that Trump openly claimed that he would wait and see if he would accept the election results, which is unprecedented in U.S. history. The U.S., as the commentators are now saying, is they pride themselves in a peaceful transition from power to power, and that's of course because, according I think to most of us here, we'd agree that the progression of power to power is just from the 1% to the 1%. But Trump, for the first time, is saying that, in fact, tonight, a new tweet came out that at a rally tonight, he said that he doubled down. He said he will have to look at it, and he will not accept it unless he wins. I don't know if you guys heard this.
That's interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
And to me, it increases, I think, the great potentiality that this election might have to turn into violence, right?
But I think there's a good point that you made over there, that the whole comedy that is being played out through these presidential debates, and you said it goes on to show how discredited politicians are, and I think it could go both ways. It could serve as, further mobilization for politics, like proper politics, or it could just make people, disenchanted from the whole political process. If this is what you end up choosing between the two, that's not really a choice.
Right.
And so that could go on and disenchant people from politics as well. And that is one of the things, we observe around the world.
I think it definitely will. I think that we should save this for the discussion.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, Eddie?
And also the idea about choice, which I wanted to say something about, but that's for the discussion. And then I lost the. And what was the other one? Oh, it was about Amy Goodman.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have been following this. This has been pretty much mainstream news. Amy Goodman, our beloved journalist from Democracy Now!, got charged with initially, was it a riot?
She got initially charged with trespassing.
Right.
And then they dropped the charges, and then they charged her with participating in a riot.
Right.
And this was dropped by a North Dakota judge. So on Monday, Amy Goodman went to North Dakota to turn herself in, and she broadcasted their Democracy Now! For that day. And according to sources, the state prosecutor wants to leave the case open. She was charged after reporting on the First Nations protectors' attempts to stop the bulldozing of sacred burial lands going to be used for the underground pipeline. For people who don't know, the First Nations protectors, those are the people, they call themselves protectors or water protectors. They are there to stop the DAPL pipeline, Dakota Access Pipeline. Not only do they see it as a huge threat to their sacred land, they understand perfectly well that is a huge threat to the water sources of over 18 million people, as well as the fact that we should be leaving this oil into the ground.
And I just want to add that it's absurd that they're doing this in reservation land. Reservation land as a result of the American government's genocide of millions of indigenous peoples. They have this land that is theirs. They have their own law, their own judges, their own police. Nevertheless, they are still able to get permission to put this pipeline through their land, although the people, the community, don't want it. And this is only after the city of Bismarck in North Dakota, the people of Bismarck decided not to have this pipeline go through their city because they knew it was dangerous. They didn't want it in their city. So that I think shows the hypocrisy of this idea that indigenous peoples, they have this reservation and it belongs to them. Yeah. Anyways, Cho, up to you.
Cool. So Ecuador on Saturday cut off Julian Assange's access to the internet in, I guess, an attempt to censor him. Ecuadorian officials released a statement on Tuesday defending their decision to censor Assange based on Ecuador's respect for, quote-unquote, the principle of non-intervention in the internal affairs of other states. Their argument basically is that the recent leaks of 3 speeches that Hillary Clinton gave to Goldman Sachs may influence the outcome of the election, and Ecuador, because because Julian Assange lives in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and has lived there for 4 years, because he's on their territory, it sort of implies them as culprits in influencing the U.S. election. So anyway, Julian Assange no longer has access to the internet. Also, WikiLeaks is saying that John Kerry pressured Ecuador to censor Assange. That's the claim that WikiLeaks is making. Ladies, back to you.
Eddie, back to you.
I'm talking. Sorry, man. What was it? It's about the impeachment scandal, right?
Mm.
I don't know if you guys heard this on the news. I mean, Brazil was on the news not too long ago because they impeached, by many international commentators, unjustly impeached their Prime Minister, President Dilma Rousseff. And, oddly enough, yesterday, Edward Cunha, a senator, was arrested for corruption. He he allegedly took millions of dollars from the Brazilian government, Brazilian-controlled Petrobras, the
State controlled.
right?
State
State-controlled
controlled, yeah.
oil
Oil
company, Petrobras. Yeah, and also up is, oh man, I keep getting lost here with my pad. Sorry, guys. Is the 2 Iranian Americans charged with 10 years for collaborating with hostile governments? It was father and son. Father's 80 years old. They went to visit their family in Iran, and they were accused for collaborating with hostile governments, sentenced to 10 years. This just again showing you the increased tensions between the U.S. and Iran. Furthermore, increased tensions with the U.S. and China. There's been for a while disputes over the South China Sea, and although the Philippines won a case brought to the International Court by their ex-president over the South China Sea, and they won it, the new President Duterte, he went to China yesterday, or today was it, to meet with Xi Jinping from the People's Republic of China, and now they're open to speak over the South China Sea again. This disputed water between Philippines, China,
And Japan.
and Indonesia. No, someone
I
else.
don't think that Indonesia claims anything on it now.
Okay.
It's mostly between these 3 governments, and China is the one that exercises has started to exercise a lot of influence in the region.
And this, I think, is all relevant to the later analysis that we're going to have.
Good.
Yeah.
And so Australia is torturing refugees. So that's fun. On their island of despair, according to an Amnesty International report. The island is called Nauru. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Nauru. Yeah. Amnesty International, they released a report detailing the deliberate and systematic torture of refugees. The report claims that the island was is intentionally designed to inflict damage on women, men, and children in order to deter refugees from coming to Australia. Many refugees on the island have attempted suicide, and the report concludes that Australia should be held accountable according to international law. So that's disgusting. Yeah. Good. Moving on to the analysis, just a few things. I was reading through our headlines, and I noticed that many of these headlines highlight a fundamental disconnect between what governments say and what they do. The situation is reminiscent in my mind, or at least this is what sort of popped into my head, of advertising. And I want to briefly look at advertising and then explain how I think it's similar to the way governments speak and act. So there are 2 things that advertising does perfectly. It's tremendous. First, advertising is great at lying. The lies advertising tells, however, are not just normal lies. They're a very particular kind of lie, which I'll come to in a second. The second thing advertising does is it conceals the labor that produces whatever it is the advertising is trying to sell. So advertising lies, like I said, in a very specific way. They lie by associating the product they're trying to sell with a value that consumers want to have but currently lack. Some values you often see expressed in advertising include individuality, be yourself, friendship, be with cool people who like you, and autonomy, make your own decisions. By associating their products with these values, advertising obscures the fact that the very act of advertising, and by extension the act of consumption, is opposed to the values that they're expressing. So buying a new iPhone will not make you an individual, it will not win you any friends, and it does not mean that you are a free thinker.
What?
I mean, surprising, right? Mind-blowing. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Materialistic overconsumption is a symptom of the lack of values and not a solution to it. So, at the same time, the things that we consume are often produced in sweatshops where workers are unfairly compensated for their time and labor, while the profits flow up into the hands of a small number of extremely wealthy individuals. Advertising conceals these uncomfortable facts because informed consumers may decide not to buy products produced in this way. Advertising is a fair analogy to politics. All governments, including blatantly non-democratic ones, speak a language designed to associate government decisions with values that are important to the people, and also to reassure the people that the government is acting in accordance with these values. Some values you often hear mentioned are human rights, freedom, or transparency. Since governments in so-called democracies act in the name of the people they represent, the language they use is also intended to legitimize elections. When we look at the global political situation, however, we see that the values expressed in government rhetoric are different from the values that inform their actions. For example, Australia officially believes in human rights. They constantly espouse a language of human rights, but they intentionally torture refugees in order to prevent more refugees from coming. Governments lie to us when they claim to act according to our dearly held values, and by lying to us, they show that they not only do not share our values, but that they are interested in obscuring that fact from us. So we can speculate why authoritarian governments want to obscure their reasons for acting from their people, but I'm interested in why so-called democratic governments do it. And the answer, I believe, has to do with legitimizing the democratic process. If the real values underpinning government decisions were known, the people who voted for them would feel betrayed and would not vote the same government into power again. Democratically elected governments want to maintain power, so they obscure the real reasons why they make decisions from their voters. Government rhetoric in democratic countries therefore associates governmental decisions with values that the government does not have, and perpetuates this falsehood in order to legitimize elections that are themselves based on the same lies. Mass elections have shown themselves to be extremely conducive to this behavior, and these mass elections have become part of the problem and cannot, without major structural change, be a part of the solution. So that's the analysis that came to mind when I was reading these articles.
To open the discussion, for one, it's a very good analysis. I think it's very telling, Chell. And I immediately thought of an example that I had used the other day of actual communism, and how, governments, the Soviet Union for instance, would say, we are communists, and so we have these communist values. And of course they had nothing even close to communist values, communist values, socialist values. That's the sharing of the means of production, the democratization of the workforce, that people get according to what they need and work according to how they can, right? Those are values of communism. But they, of course, espouse these values while at the same time, putting their heel on the faces of people. And on the other hand, of course, we have the United States saying, oh, look, those are communists over there. And look what communism does. They're all totalitarian people. So, this governments work basically in tandem with each other, actually. The propaganda of one government can be used by as propaganda for another government. And they can just point fingers at each other, say, you guys are doing these horrible things, and therefore your system is wrong. You guys are doing these horrible things, therefore your system is wrong. And this reminds me of our discussion last week, where we were talking about, I think before the discussion, actually before the podcast, Russia and the United States. It came up, how can the United States be pointing a finger at Russia when it has been doing these things themselves? And how can Russia be pointing a finger at the United States when they've been doing these horrible things? And I think the best point that was made, for one, was by our good friend Eddie, who said, well, when we're talking about these things, we got to make sure that we're not including the we into it. We are not the United States, us Americans here, or any Russians. We are not Russian. We're not Russia. So when we're talking about this, we've got to make sure that we're distancing ourselves. These are two warring factions, warring capitalist factions. Both sides of them are fighting each other, and they're using the values that we understand in order to fight against each other. So what do we do from there? I leave this question for you guys.
But I think it's not just that. It's that people connect with these values, right? The fact that, American governments back in the Cold War days, they spoke about the values of, the spirit of hard work and the spirit of, making it big, the American dream. That was something that people could relate to, that people could connect themselves with. So it's not just values that that they make up. It's values that they're a part of their social makeup. They're a part of their social culture, which is why people could relate to them. Which is why people think that the governments, insofar as they're acting according to these values, they are representing them.
Yeah, that's why.
Which is what Shell was alluding to.
So
yeah,
good.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to say, thinking about Shell's analysis, which I really liked, made me think of something a friend of ours, someone we all know, I'll just call him T Money, told me recently when he came to visit me. He's working as a speechwriter for a politician somewhere in the world, and he was blown away as to how real politics works. And he told me that the catchphrase that they have is, politics is presentation. That's all it is. Yeah, has a lot to do with this marketing. I think this is epitomized by Trump. He just lies all the time, but it doesn't matter because no one really checks.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all.
He's a child. He's a fucking child on stage. Everyone sees this. It doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also epitomized by Hillary Clinton,
Yeah,
right?
of course. No,
absolutely.
I mean,
We
I
all
love it
understand
in the
that.
second debate. At the very beginning, they talked about Trump and the grab the pussy thing, and Hillary looked at Trump and she said, "Trump, you have to take responsibility for the things that you've said." Yeah, and then 5 minutes later, the moderator said, "So Hillary, what about this thing you said, where that politicians have to have a public face and a private face?" And she said, and Hillary looks and she says, "You know what? Well, let's talk about what's really going on. Russia is trying to manipulate the U.S. election." It's like, way to take responsibility for the things that you said, Hillary.
Yeah, exactly.
After 5 minutes previously telling Trump that he has to do it, you just totally didn't do it. Now, yes, Russia might be manipulating the election, and that would be an issue that we should talk about. However, Russia did not say in a speech to Goldman Sachs that people have to have a public and a private face. Right? You said that, Hillary, and you need to take responsibility for it.
And I just want to add to get us back to the discussion, because it's really easy to get into the Trump-Clinton thing.
Trump and Clinton.
Is that, and it's going back to what you said, and that's, and now that I'm forgetting.
That's how it works.
Now I forgot. Actually, go ahead, Andrew. Let me remember what I said.
Okay, well, what I wanted to go into, I mean, I mean, this is exactly another point of warring factions. I mean, look,
I remember.
the only ability that Trump, this child, has his, Eddie is whispering into Chelsea right now, so I'll talk to Navas. The only way this child is able to have the support that he has is because there's, for a long time, this culture in the United States of seeing liberals as terrible people, of this right-wing culture that we have in the United States. And our political system is pitting two warring factions against each other in a wonderfully well-orchestrated fashion. It doesn't have to be something that that they planned in the beginning. It doesn't matter. It's all there, and it's falling into place. The president that many of us think is going to lead us into war, Hillary Clinton, is going to be elected, most likely. Eddie.
Yeah, no, I remember what I wanted to say, and it's in part tied to what we spoke about last time, and it's how this election and just what's going on in the world in general, because I think we can string a lot of things together just internationally, is the legitimacy of this form of democracy. And a lot of people are just not buying it anymore, and what we find in Trump and Clinton is this really idealization of the political class and the billionaire class, or the elite class. Of course, the political class they have always been the puppets for the billionaire class. But what we see, and maybe we could discuss this, but what we see going on with Trump is this rogue kind of billionaire wanting to just take direct control, seeing that we don't need puppets anymore. And he's showing it. He's showing you could be openly racist, openly misogynistic, and still people will support you. This was always the underpinnings of our democracy, so-called democracy, right? But now he's realized, to me, and for this, I mean, maybe we could talk about how tactful he is. He's realized that, no, we don't need the puppet class anymore, these puppet politicians, career politicians. We can just directly take power, right? And of course, we could talk about his connections with Berlusconi over there in Italy. But, and this ties down to legitimacy. And I wonder, maybe something we could even, I'm curious to know what you guys think, to do a deeper analysis on how this connects with so many headlines we've spoken about. How this crisis of democracy is connecting to just global conflict. I mean, global conflict has been there for a while, but I mean, things are really looking bad with Russia, with China, with Iran, with North Korea. I mean, things are really looking bad with a president who's seen as a very pragmatic and very intelligent guy. You know, a president that's seen as someone who really thinks about things. Imagine when we have someone who doesn't, like a Bush Cheney, how bad these things would get. So I'm just really curious for you guys to see how we can connect maybe this crisis in democracy and also these international conflicts, these deep international conflicts, not these little petty proxy wars.
Yeah, I just also, and kind of, I guess an aside, but really quick, I also want to point out, really quick, on the topic of Hillary not taking responsibility for the things she says, I actually don't think it's wrong. I'm sorry to take it right back to Hillary Clinton, right? I don't think it's wrong that politicians have to have a public and a private face, right? I mean, because in public, they kind of have to sort of operate in a very sort of general level. They deliver a general message to a lot of people, I think that people should have the opportunity to also come into contact with politicians and hear the nitty-gritty a bit, but I think that it's the time costs to explain the nitty-gritty to 350 million Americans are prohibitive. Yeah, so I think politicians do have to have this public and this private side. But what really pisses me off is that Hillary Clinton she holds the American people in such low esteem that she doesn't believe that we're smart enough to realize how complicated and difficult politics is. For me, part of the crisis in democracy is that politicians have convinced themselves, or the political class have convinced themselves, that the people can't handle the truth. And how am I supposed to believe anything they say if their modus operandi is lie your ass off because the people can't handle the truth? Try me out, tell me the truth. Maybe it'll be sick and disgusting, and then, well, that's good to know, because that's what's motivating your decision-making process, right? It's very important that I know the truth for that reason, but maybe, just maybe, what you believe, politician, will turn out to resonate with me. Maybe I'll be like, okay, it is a really difficult issue. Okay, you were faced with two bad choices and you made a reasonable decision. And I respect it. It was hard and it maybe wasn't what I would do, but I respect it, and I respect the fact that you told me the truth about it. But if you just assume from the very beginning that Americans can't handle the truth and then you're just going to lie and that's how politics is done, then our system it does not function. It cannot function. A democracy cannot function in this way. And I just wanted to point that out.
You can't handle the truth.
I would say for actually this is an exact example of why the system cannot work. Period. Like it could never work. Period. At all. This system, democracy, the democratic system that we have nowadays, the actual democratic system, not democracy. I'm not talking about these things.
Representative.
I'm talking about representative democracy, right? And I want to tie it into what Eddie was saying as well. I mean, first off, you had exactly right. If they were honest to us, maybe we would actually like it. Well, Trump is being perceived as being honest.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason that he's actually come so as far as he has, as childish as he is, he seems honest. But on the other hand, we had Eddie talking about, it was Barack Obama, right? This reasonably intelligent person who is a head of state, who probably does think ahead, probably does see a lot of things that we also see, that we could even see eye to eye on many things, and yet there are a lot of problems in the world. And I point out, he is the one who's deporting the most immigrants of any president ever. And I was about to say concentration camps, but I didn't mean to, but they actually probably are concentration camps. The immigrant camps, where ICE puts illegal immigrants in the United States. They're also torturing these people. Not as strong as Australia has shown, because the Australian racism is deeper in this case. But it's still, they're torturing people. There was a case of a woman who had to go on a hunger strike just so she could get basic care, basic rights for her children.
private businesses.
Eddie is bubbling to say something, so I'll wrap it up. And this shows that these all these things are connected, all around the world, and it's all the same system. There you go.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to just for a second. I wanted you to continue, but just to say that these ICE prisons is called. They're funded. They're private industry, right?
Yeah.
And we have to understand that as smart or I never forget. I don't know if you'll be listening to this, but Victor Augusta, he made a great point. Years ago. He said, "Look, man, given our current economic political system, even if you had Murray Bookchin or Karl Marx as president, they would still be forced to do these human right violations, all these horrible things that empire just forces you to do." So I think we have to be careful in talking about, look, Obama, he's a president, he does all these bad things, to distinguish between the is and the ought. Yeah, it's better that he doesn't do these things, but he's forced in a sense. And I'm not saying this to be apologetic. I'm just saying that it's a systemic crisis. It's a crisis with this so-called form of democracy. These prisons are privately funded. These politicians have to manage demands by the population. They have to manage demands by private interests. They need these private interests because they get money to get elected, and so it's this whole game that they're playing, this face that they're putting out, so that they can win over the population. That's the problem. And I think what we're seeing now is that we're in a very interesting historical juncture where this is becoming evident to everyone. Crises are bubbling up everywhere, and it's gonna blow. I think it seems to me like it will, and we have to start thinking about what are alternatives. I think what we're doing here, getting together and talking about these things, is an alternative. Maybe you guys listening can also join the alternative.
Yeah, I think all three of you made some really good points, but I would just like to play the devil's advocate over here. I would say that the basic reason that you have parliament or statecraft top of what people, and this was going back to Chel's point about the people not being able to accept the truth. I think it's not that way. It's just that what a politician does in the logic of the system is that the politician rationalizes or transforms public opinion into statecraft, right? So if you have 60% people in a country that want to deport, Muslims, right? A politician has to tone this down, right? Because a politician knows that this is not something they can do, right? That's the sort of thing that a politician has to act on at the level of statecraft. So there is one thing, the public opinion. Then you have the transfer of public opinion through representatives into the legislatures. And then you have from the legislatures the people who actually, carry out state policy. So this is basically the filtering down. Now this filtering down could work positively in the cases where you have, fascist public opinion about things, right? In the case of Colombia, like what we saw, right? The president goes on, signs a peace deal. I don't know if this example suits, but just as an example, the president goes on, negotiates a peace deal with rebels, which would put down a civil war that has been ravaging the country for 40 years. What did the public do? He puts it up to a referendum. I don't know if this was clever or not, but this was put up to a referendum. The public bullets it down. The whole process is down the drain, right? So this is where you have to be careful, from the logic of the system. This is the sort of thing that you would, as a statesman or a stateswoman, not something be open to. Secondly, the points that Eddie referred to, right, in terms of the logic of the system and all that, I would say, or earlier about Trump, I think what's happening over here is that Trump represents certain values to the people who are supporting him, right? He's not just some idiot who's just run amok, right? He's a very intelligent guy in his own way. He's successful, right? He sells that thing, and people buy it, right? Why do people buy it? This is one thing that we should question, right? Why do people buy it? Is because a lot of things that he say reverberate with the public, with the voters of the Republican Party, right? Which, as I was reading recently somewhere, are largely from rural communities, right? Largely conservative in their view of the society, of the society or the social values that they think America stands for, the United States stands for, right? And which is why they don't want their country to go to, the dogs or the devil, legalize gay marriage, that kind of stuff. Now, I am not taking a position on these, but it's just that there could possibly be, talking points that Trump makes which connect to these people. Now this goes back to what Shell was talking earlier about in terms of people being able to handle the truth. Now people, as we know, are very easily manipulated with the sophisticated mass media that we have today. People are very easily pushed from one agenda to another, right? And what matters in this case is that who is controlling. And this is something we've spoken about. This is something we try to espouse when we call ourselves propaganda, right? That people need to be informed and need to be informed well. So I think that is where the bigger difference would lie. It does not matter what sort of a system you put up on people. You had other systems that would, brutally use, propaganda to present themselves as, I don't know, whatever, islands of prosperity or whatever. But still, that was not the case. So,
yeah, no, that's a great point, and it reminds me firstly of Theodor Adorno. If you guys get a chance, if you don't know who he is, philosopher, social critic, early 20th century. He was a German Jewish dissident leaving Nazi Germany in the 30s, and he was blown away when he got to New York to see the level of, I guess, ideological manipulation that was going on in the U.S. How would you?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you wanted to talk about that, because he went on and carried this sort of an experiment.
I didn't want to go into the experiment. I just wanted to go into his observations.
Yeah, okay.
And how blown away he was by the progression of American consumeristic culture, and how it has, this is not a word, but I'm going to invent it, dumbified all of us.
It's a great word, dumbified.
Yeah.
It's kind of like stupefied.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's not a word and
probably
it's
it is
a dumb word and dumbify, it works on like 2 levels at least,
It's a bit ableist, though, I'm just going to say.
And I just want to say, just a very quick point, is that this in itself shows the crisis of democracy. I mean, what is democracy? Democracy is people getting together, talking to each other about issues, and trying to reach some kind of synthesis of ideas. Being open to the fact that their ideas are just one way of looking at it, and that in conversation with other people, their ideas can change and transform, and hopefully they can reach to a higher truth, right? When we go to the US, or rather, when we go to especially these rural areas, which it so happens are supporting Trump, they are taking views that are very old school. They don't want to change their views. They are not open to democracy in its very nature. And so, to me, there is a requisite for democracy, and that requisite is conversation, cooperation,
informed
talking.
audience. I would say an informed audience.
And yeah. And an informed audience means talking about it and engaging in the democratic process.
Totally.
And that's my response to your points. Yeah.
Well, as a good propagandist, I'd say this conversation has been very dialectical. And I mean, actually, that both sides are correct. Both sides, Nawaz pointed out very, very well. We look at the type of people who are voting for Trump, what they do, or what kind of education level and all that. And then you look at the other side of the system. And I think that's where we are stepping in right now, is to facilitate these two sides coming together, in the sense that allowing people to become educated and giving them also the spaces, the system, in order to become educated and to also participate and form their own system the way they need it. And now, because we're running out of time for this segment, I want to lead into Nawaz's piece, CIA piece on Nobel Prizes.
Yeah.
But before that, we will take a short break.